this is well, Jeff, I just have to thank you so much for your talk. There's been a variety of things over the years. I've been in industry for almost 29 years that, I've thought about, and since I became a Christian, certainly the challenge of thinking through some of these issues for a variety of reasons. I think God has given me opportunities to share around the country. Has been on my mind. Okay, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I like the context that you put things into, so I really, really do appreciate it, and I think it's a very fundamentally sound approach that it's grounded in grounded in God's Word. These guys had a really interesting objective for us. We're supposed to hear this and then instantly digest it and then tell you something unique or different, which I find to be very, 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 very challenging. I have to, just number one, I have to resonate with what he's saying. There's no doubt that the view of business, not just in America, but around the world, is upside down. And we know that. And, I think there probably are a lot of concerns about the capitalist system. I don't really think God really had a big concern about the systems. All right. I think if we can find a system that's efficient and actually works against the goals of allowing people to use their gifts at their highest level possible to make a redemptive change in the world, and to find a way, as you said, sustainability, to deliver a level of sustainability that matters for people, I believe he'd be pleased, whether it's a modified capitalist system or it's this or it's that or whatever. I don't really think that matters. In fact, you could argue that the system God actually employed when he started with his chosen people, the Jews, was very radically different than the full capitalist system, right? If you think about it, every 49 years, everything reverted back to the people. Every 7 years, an indentured servant was made free. And that's quite different than what we have, where ownership can go on in perpetuity. And the concepts that we operate in are very, very different. So, and I know nobody likes to hear that, but the truth of the matter is the system that he was running at that time with his people was radically different than what we're doing. And the institutions that we've set up to perpetuate the differences that we see in society are very, very different than that. Okay, and that's fine. We can debate that or not. I think what, in my mind, I start thinking about is the company mission of the place that I work. And what are the values that we actually have and hold? And are they, even moving in this zone or not? Interestingly enough, about 7 years ago, I had the privilege of working on a new mission statement for the company and a new set of values. And in that process, we came up with this idea that General Mills' mission was to nourish lives. Okay? And that's a big concept, right? Because not only are you talking about feeding people in a way that's fundamental, but you're also, we've expanded it over time. We kind of got smart and said, oh my gosh, this nourishing lives thing is really big. You can nourish the environment, just sustainability. You can, oh my goodness, nourish your employees, right? You can nourish your shareholders, right, by generating return for your shareholders. This thing is pretty profound and pretty big. And over the years, we've actually been kind of rolling out a broader concept around nourishing lives. Now, I'm not saying the Mills is thinking at all that profit isn't the main game, but we also realize that we're in a business that fundamentally is set up to feed the world, right? And to the extent that we can feed the world, we're the 6th largest food player in the world. If we can get to number 1, that would be a great thing, provided we're providing things that nourish people. And fundamentally nourish the communities that they live in, which is the 5th of those nourishing life things. And so I had a privilege to work on that, but I don't think we've got the profit thing kind of set up the right way. I would say, secondly, I'm on the board of a very, very large bank, 5th largest bank in the U.S. And I think banks have lost their idea about what the role is of a bank. Because in many ways what banks are, they are the actual oil and engine that allows commerce to actually take place. They're the oil, they're the engine for commerce, by creating liquidity, moving capital in different ways. That's the job of a bank, okay? And it's an important role, and do not be deceived. If banks do not do that role, things don't work. Okay, houses don't get bought, businesses don't get started, capital isn't raised, new plants aren't built for future growth, investments can't happen for small business, stuff stops, right? And you've read that in the paper, the government complaining that banks aren't lending and blah, 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 right? The truth of the matter is banks can't make money if they don't lend. Okay, everything else becomes a demand deposit. You can't make money if you don't lend, so it actually behooves you to lend. But they have that role, and that's a fundamental role in this bigger ecosystem that you've put together, Jeff, which I think is really, really important. The third thing that was going around in my mind, and frankly I've been bubbling around this on a while, is this issue of generous justice, this issue of justice, you know, in the things that we do. And there's a Hebrew word called mishpat, which means righteousness and justice. And we have a responsibility and a burden as leaders and people in business to ensure that the things that we do are righteous. You call that sustainability, but are they just? And so as you rattled off wages, you know, I mean, because we have a minimum wage in this country, and, you know, for a lot of, you know, good views, there are reasons for it, but I will tell you, you know, that minimum wage will keep you homeless, right? You know, we have issues of things like healthcare. You know, I'm not selling a healthcare system or program, it's not my deal. But let me tell you right now, if I just recently had a detached retina, and I was very fortunate to work for a company that nourishes its employees, and I was able to get help. But what if you were a person who was unable to get help? And let's say you were a construction worker and you've just now lost an eye. Well, you're no longer productive. Okay, you can't do what you're called to do or what you're created to do in God's image. And, you know, that's a problem. And we can fix things like that. You know, we can actually think about how we spend our money in different ways to make sure that we're nourishing lives, we're making people better, and we're keeping them productive and sustainable in their lives. Issues of education, you know, it's almost a form of oppression, you know, in large parts of our society today. The poor levels of education and the uneven distribution of education that happens in our society is a form of oppression. And there are a lot of them. And folks, we have responsibilities as Christians to try to redeem those things, to stand up, to go out and say we're going to make a difference, and speak and have a voice and say certain things aren't right, you know. And when we take a blind eye to a lot of these things, we're actually co-signing the oppression that actually happens. So those were just a few thoughts, just based on, you know, Jeff, what you've actually shared. And I know we'll have questions, but I didn't want to just say I affirmed what you thought. I wanted to at least try to move it in some other directions and challenge us as Christians to say, you know, we are the redeemers. We're the people of God who are giving the challenge to be the salt, to be the light, to be the difference, to walk with righteousness and truth, and to be willing to effectuate or stand in the gap to make a difference. So with that, I'll get out of the way, and we'll turn it over.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for your remarks and for what I think you've done very effectively, and that is to apply a narrative to business that provides a context and a frame that actually brings the right sort of balance and brings hope, I think, to the challenges that business and capitalism face today in the world, which really in so many ways has gotten out of balance and upside down, as you've quite eloquently pointed out. And restoring that narrative to the context of business is an extremely important, I think, gift that you've given through your work that is clearly out of favor in today's culture. That in fact there may be a grand narrative that is applicable to our lives and to what we value and what we focus upon and the way we conduct our affairs. And so this very unpopular and a very challenged way of thinking is, however, I think a very, very powerful way to provide the sort of context for business that enables us all to think about the challenges that we face in running businesses to do it with some wisdom and with some balance that enables us to actually achieve or really have hope towards the sort of balance and the sort of shalom that you have mentioned and put out as so valuable. So I very much appreciate that and think that that is really worth talking about and exploring in and of itself. Is what is the narrative, what is the context by which we conduct our affairs, and what does it say about the limits that we should apply? Because we do get into trouble when we cast off our limits or assume that we are limitless. You know, a humanist approach to a really unlimited man gets into trouble very quickly. And we see that throughout all sorts of different realms today, and business especially when business is so capable of actually producing wealth and producing assets, which in and of itself is not wrong, but at what expense and compromising what? So I think this is a tremendous gift and needs to be brought forward, needs to be debated, and needs to be spread as a thought and as a context that is very useful for us. I think that the one thing that I would question a bit about your work, however, is whether we have in considering business as the topic, I feel almost a bit like it has been depersonalized or objectified in a way that takes it out of the moralistic or the moral frame that I think you're trying to apply, but by considering it a practice or a power even. I think in your book you use that frame. It, I think, takes off the hook too much the role of individuals in business. So as we think of business as a concept, we can say, well, this is where it's falling off or where it's out of balance. But it really comes down, I think, to individuals exercising judgment, to human beings, to workers who have various roles, including leadership, to apply the context and truth to come up with hopeful answers to these sort of challenges. And I would take that a little bit further, and in your purpose for business, you describe purpose in terms of the good and meaningful work that it provides, and for the excellence in service, services or needed goods that it provides, and that there is a balance between those. The third part that I think is, and you've already mentioned, you're aware of this criticism, or you quite often receive it, is the question about profits. But I think the missing person in that picture is the owner. So whether we think of that owner as a shareholder or as someone who is more personal, I heard the other day that the average length of a stock hold on the New York Stock Exchange, this will blow you away, is 22 seconds. That's the average length of hold of a share. So the high frequency type of trading and all has really taken that mode way over. But nonetheless, the role of the shareholder, I think, or the owner, is very important to say, what is that individual doing in terms of what is their role in this? So we have the customer and we have the employee or the worker, and I think the owner also has a role in that. And I guess my question for you is, why not optimize those three, which is to optimize the goods and services provided, the work or the wage, and the actual accumulation of capital. You talk about attracting, that it is legitimate to attract capital, but is it not legitimate to actually create capital? Is that not a role of business that actually provides the means by which resources can be accumulated so that they're investable in in something that is outside of the realm where that wealth is created? Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear your response to that. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, thank you both very much for your kind words and very encouraging words. I sometimes let me sort of, because you're fresh in my mind here. Let me respond to this point. I sometimes have been accused of subordinating shareholders to employees or customers, and I don't think that's quite fair. What I've talked about is what is the object of the business as a whole trying to achieve in society. And I also add to that, and I didn't say this, but from the standpoint of what would I tell a manager or a leader of an organization he or she is trying to achieve. When I say that, I'm viewing capital as I view labor, as I view these are necessary inputs, but they are inputs into an organization that has this higher purpose of serving society in some ways. So when I get down to the question of sustainability, or that is, they are very much in the mix. And I always say that one does not deal adequately with capital without paying a reasonable risk-adjusted rate of return on that capital. But if you could imagine a business that that was heavily dependent on location to be successful, you might say it's absolutely critical that we pay attention to paying the rent in a timely fashion. We dare not default, we'll lose. But you wouldn't say necessarily that you were running the business for the sake of the landlord. And so I try to distinguish in my own mind anyhow between what large goals are being accomplished versus who I need to respect as input providers along the way. And so I do make that distinction. I absolutely believe that business creates wealth and that's one of its unique, wonderful attributes. There really isn't, I mean, if you think about it, it's in a sense the only institution in our society that creates wealth. All other institutions draw down on the economic capital that business creates. I mean, the other institutions create different types of capital that business draws down on, but business is the sole source of economic capital. And so it's not that I don't absolutely believe that, but when I'm saying to an individual manager, here's your purpose, go out and create wealth, I don't know what I'm really saying that's different than go get goods and services that will enable that community to flourish and do it in a way that respects the need to be reasonably profitable along the way. I'm not sure we're saying something different, and if we're not saying something different, then I like my formulation better than the other, because when you put them all in the mix in our society today, the shareholder seems to always rise to the top, even though we talk about them being in the mix. So it's a point that I sometimes worry that it's just a rhetorical different way of saying it, but I think there's a little more substance to it than just that. But I'm clearly familiar with that challenge, and that's probably my best on a short-term way of responding to that. I do want to say, as the earlier remarks too, that Mark's thoughts. I think it's useful to be reminded that as individuals, and this I completely agree too, that as individuals we have moral responsibility and we function through a wide variety of institutions. So I am both part of a church and a government and a business, and so in that sense, what I've tried to do is to, in a way that may be too artificial, but to try to say, as I operate through this institution, What are the particular goals that are well suited for this institution? So that's why, for example, some of my colleagues want me to make protecting the environment a first order purpose. And I say, no, I don't think business fundamentally exists to protect the environment. It needs to pursue its purpose while respecting that boundary condition, but it's not for that purpose. And being really careful here, because I so applaud the underlying piece, I don't think business exists per se to right economic injustice or inequality and so on. I think we as individuals very much have a call to participate in justice, and there are institutions that are better suited for that. But, I mean, I'm also calling for the livable wage, and so in a sense of sustainability. So to some extent, in the do no harm category, I'm willing to put boundaries, but in the affirmative do good category, I'm willing to give business a smaller agenda than a broad open-ended agenda, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So we do have time for some questions, and we'd especially like to hear from students. So can you pass that down? Thanks.
Well, I'm not a student, but I was. Went to the U of M. I was just curious to know what you thought about something I read in the paper recently about something called BCorps, or benefit corporations, that has recently been organized in the United States. And the idea is that they would not be held to legal responsibility. Shareholders couldn't sue them, in other words, for putting some sustainable purposes or whatever may be over shareholder value. So an example would be Ben & Jerry's, for instance. They registered as a B Corp. So I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on that structure, if you think it can be successful in business, or do you think it's some hybrid between nonprofits and for-profits that we're seeing because people want to see more good come out of organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be really interested in your all reaction to it too, but I have a very ambivalent reaction to this B Corporation movement. I'm enthused by what I think animates it. But here's my concern. My concern is what I think as a lawyer, that the law is not as clear as it is often held up to be, that if I as a corporate leader don't manage solely for the shareholder under a shareholder maximization model, I'm in danger of liability. There are some that think that law is pretty clear and we need a way out, hence the B Corporation. What I am a little concerned about is once we have B Corporations, it will lead people to say, now if they really wanted anything other than shareholder maximization, they should have gone over there. So now we're going to hold all of these other corporations more strictly and clearly to a straight shareholder maximization model. And so it may actually perversely have the reverse effect of what it's trying to have, and it may end up being an entity that is reserved for the few Toms of Maine, Ben & Jerry's, you know, the handful of companies that we all mention in this light, whereas my heart is that the day-to-day hardcore blue-chip businesses would see their responsibility in society in different terms. And I'm a little worried that the move to B Corporation, because I bet it's a long time before General Mills says, I'll be a B Corporation. And I don't mean that critically, because it also comes with a bunch of other bundled stuff. But that's my reaction to it. I don't know. Anything about it?
Well, I'm just confused because I know that Ben & Jerry's is owned by Unilever. So I guess I'm really, really confused. I mean, truthfully, they're owned by Unilever. I know they're owned by Unilever.
Brian, if I could just return to the question about shareholder for just in response a bit, Jeff, to your comment. I think you made the case for it in saying that actually business is unique in its ability to generate capital, and that all these other sectors draw down what actually has been accumulated there. Is that not an argument to say that is a legitimate purpose of business, is to generate capital for the many other purposes that it can be redistributed to?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand the argument, and I can see that piece. I think, again, from my vantage point, if I say to you as a manager, what I want you to focus on is providing, optimizing goods and services that will enable your community to flourish. But by the way, your only options are ones that are profitable. You don't get to give the product away, even if you think that might enhance flourishing. You've got to run a profitable business. I think I've given you the right direction. I think if I throw in that other piece, I now am giving you, so for example, I think if mortgage bankers and our mortgage brokers in our country had been asking, is this product I'm selling, this loan that they can't repay so they can buy a house they can't afford, is this going to cause the community to flourish? Instead of asking which will enhance the capital growth of my company, we'd be in a pretty different place today. And so I do think it kind of matters. But
I think that's the creative tension, really, that the owner or the manager owns, is how do you balance things effectively. So you have to balance the issue of price of your goods and your wage of your employees and your profit. Those are definitely things that have to be optimized. There is no formula that solves that. And so really it is the judgment of the owner or the manager, the leader, to actually, I think, optimize that. For 20 years I was on the board of a company called ServiceMaster, and it had four objectives. First was to honor God in all we do. Second was to pursue excellence. The third was to help people develop. And the fourth was to grow profitably. And I think that those honor God in all we do was sort of the tiebreaker in optimizing the excellence, the development of people, and the profit itself.
although I think, because we've had Bill Pollard come out and speak at our school and read some of his books, I think what he would say of those four goals, he characterizes two of them as what he calls means goals. And profitability is in the means goals.
Yep.
And so you could this is where I think it starts getting rhetorical. He says you make profit in order that we can do these two higher goals. Then in my judgment, now I'm talking about, I don't have to, you can either choose to include it as a subordinate overall goal, or just say, okay, it's not the primary purpose, but it's still critically important. So at that level, it feels to me like we really are kind of dancing on different ways of saying close to almost exactly the same thing.
Thank you very much for this. This has been a great discussion that we're having. I'm a graduate student here at the Carlson School of Management, and then also work for a large corporation, publicly traded corporation. And one thing I struggle with is how can this apply, not only in a pluralistic society, but in a very pluralistic corporation, one that has people from very different backgrounds working. And being from Seattle, I'm obviously Microsoft, Amazon, large companies like that. And how does a Christian work in that type of environment, knowing that the values that they hold dear may not be the same values of most of the other coworkers in the company, or even of leadership? How does that play out?
It seems like maybe you're asking two questions there, and let me take a stab at one, and my hunch is maybe you all are better placed to answer the second one than I am. One of the questions is, what if I'm not really in a position, I'm not the leader, I'm not the CEO, I can't direct the company? How do I talk in these terms when the organization may be pointing off in another direction? And then the second is, how can I, as a Christian, allow my Christian values to inform choices I want to see made, even if I were the CEO in a pluralistic, publicly traded? On the first one, it's a question that I get a lot from our graduate students, or our undergraduates. We give them another way of doing business model, and they say, Jeff, this would be great. When I'm CEO of Boeing, this is what we're going to do. But right now, I'm just kind of the entry-level little analyst. And I say to them, I said, well, absolutely. That when you first go into business, in any place in business, you can always pay attention to the micro level. That is, you can always pay attention to being honest, kind, respectful, giving a solid day's work, the sort of personal characteristics. You can do those from day one. But you don't have much of a sphere of authority when you first start out, for sure. What's always amazed me is how quickly you get at least some. 2 or 3 years out, you got a team of 2 or 3 or something that you know. And what I say there is, as to these bigger things like purpose and limits and so on, what you do is you lean into them as you can, where you can, recognizing that you're bounded. And actually, your boundaries don't go away as you go up higher the chart. You just have different entities that are providing some of those bounds. So, but you still lean into them. So you can say, is there some way I could restructure the jobs of the 2 or 3 people that are working with me so as to give them more opportunities to creatively engage with their work? Or, hey, what if we did this with this product? Maybe that would actually be something that the community would really enjoy. So you get little chances, and then as you get promoted, as your circle gets bigger, you get more chances. But that's, you just have to own the responsibility within the sphere that you've been given for the time. But the second part of the question is, how do we allow our Christian faith to shape and inform a pluralistic, often publicly traded corporation? And since you guys both did that, and I haven't, or are doing that, maybe you could take a crack at that one.
You on that one? Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's as difficult a question as you made it out to be. I think first and foremost, wherever we go, whatever we do, we're walking with Christ in our lives. And there are expectations that he has for us to walk in a certain way and to live a certain way and to redeem the things that are there. So it doesn't matter whether wherever you go, whatever time of day, whatever thing you're in, you're supposed to do it for the glory of God to the very best that you possibly can, knowing the constraints that you had. You think in biblical times, people were slaves. Frankly, in America, people were slaves. Paul has cautions to slaves to do the things they do within that context, as if under God. I'm not arguing for slavery, obviously. But what I'm using the most aggressive example to say that whatever you are, wherever you are, whatever it is, you're doing it for the glory of God. And I think maybe part of the problem as Christians when we're in business is that we don't have a very developed construct of what it means to walk in an environment with a level of sense of purpose and meaning for the things that you do. And I think that's maybe where we struggle a lot. I look back at Daniel in the Old Testament, and he was in Babylon, which was not a happening place to be if you were a Jew. And those guys there were found to be 10 times better, right, in the things of matters of thinking and answering questions and the whole deal. They were found to be better. God will also empower us to do things. But I think we have to come in with a sense of mission and purpose. And as you said, you can redeem the small things that you've got. And then if you're faithful in little, God will make you faithful in more over time. And when you're in those positions, you have to have an eye to say, how can we deliver everything? Deliver what the company's looking for, and also make it closer to the things that God's expecting. So when we were working on Nourishing Lives, there was obviously some thinking in my head about, well, how can we take this thing into a slightly different construct that might make us think differently about what we're doing. That's a small bit of impact. I didn't say I wrote the thing. I mean, the company owns it. Right, but but I think that has to start from the inside out, and I think a lot of us are very confused about what our real purpose is, when we walk into work.
Yeah, I think there is a real challenge of how do we exhibit, as I think James David Hunter described, a faithful presence. So as a Christian, what does faithful presence look like in different corporate settings? And I think it is about bringing the narrative that Jeff has brought here to bear in the realm of the work that you're doing, and in bringing that narrative and the truth of that frame forward and lived out authentically, and honestly, with love, then I think that provides the opportunities to actually be that faithful presence in whatever the particular realm is that or responsibility that anyone might have in a particular corporation. And but there is tremendous opportunity to, I think, actually bring new vision, new wisdom to these settings from that narrative.
Again, my name is Lucas. I'm a senior at the Carlson School of Management. Thank you three for all talking about this issue. I think it's really getting at the difficulty and the conflict between Christianity and business. My question is, some people say we have to pay a higher wage, a livable wage, and then you hear that's not possible because of international other companies operating in different countries are able to pay less money, and it just wouldn't be profitable to pay a living wage. Or we can't raise taxes on businesses here because they could just leave, and other countries don't have those business taxes. And so a lot of, I guess, the problems are bigger than an individual business. They're global problems that need to be, operated across countries. How would you address those kind of problems?
I don't know how you address fundamental global problems, but I know that most things that are solved are started, in the small. They're started in your domain. They're started in the things that you do. And I think it's very easy for us to pass the buck and not do the things we know we're supposed to do to bring light to them in hope for a global solution or a statewide solution or a national solution or something else. I've found incredible resourcefulness around issues and challenges when you get innovative people together who think that there is a solution for a problem. And, but it seems to start very small and then moves from there. Most of the people who think about all that other stuff, nothing ever gets done. They talk a lot, it's rhetorical, and they all feel good and they feel bright, but nothing happens.
Yeah, I think it is in the creation of wealth itself that you have the opportunity to address that. And it is how good are you at creating wealth, and then optimizing your different constituencies to start to actually make progress on that. So I think it is actually where wealth is created or value is created that you have the best leverage on actually making progress on livable wage. What I mistrust are broad sweeps of the hand from a policy standpoint that would decree that is going to accomplish it, and that there are no side effects, that we get ahead of ourselves and assume we have wealth that we don't. So that is dangerous as well. So I think that the challenge is really diligent work and value creation, and then appropriate reverence for the balance of people that you are working with, and what their needs and what they should be apportioned within that business mix. So and it's the shareholder, and it's the employee, and it's the customer. All of those, there is no formula to solve that equation. It has to be thought through in the situation, and I think informed by the limits that Jeff has brought forward in this book, you'll do a better job of that than if you don't bring that frame.
The world runs off of expectations too. If people could say, oh, it's too expensive to provide a daycare, at your company. It's too expensive. We certainly can't afford to do a pension. Healthcare has got to be out. We really can't do a great job of feeding our folks. Hey, let's not spend money to educate the people that we bring into the organization. You can go on and on and on and come up with reasons why those things shouldn't be done. And we can come up with reasons why they should be done. And then challenge our people to deliver better innovation and meet the needs of consumers in such a way that you can do those. You know, we want people who can deliver volume, share, and profit and make a difference in society. We give 5% of our company pre-tax profits to charity every year, and it's a great honor to sit on the foundation. But a lot of companies will say, we can't afford to do 5%. We're only making 4. Well, we're like, well, no, we're going to deliver 5 and we're going to make 10. And I'm looking for people who actually can work in a place and do those things. You know, but you set the expectation and you work hard to find people who actually can try to achieve goals versus just make excuses on why things can't change. So, you know, I guess when I look at those things, you know, I look at them as obstacles, but I know that there are, you know, that in many ways we can come up with ideas and solutions to try to overcome them, but it's just easy to cop out and just not do it.
And let me add that at a more sort of less practical, theoretical level, what I think you may be saying is, what if the market doesn't allow me to do all this sustainability, all this kind of purpose stuff? And clearly, the best answer is be better than the rest of the people in the market so that you have leverage and not extra, but you have the capacity to get closer to this. I absolutely affirm that. But there is a school of thought. Robert Reich has written a book called Super Capitalism. And he says it's ridiculous to talk to companies about CSR because companies now compete in such a global, fast-moving competition that anybody that takes one step off of what is absolutely going to maximize profitability in the market is dead. Now, you can do CSR sorts of things as long as they actually are the sorts of CSR things that contribute to profits.
CSR.
Corporate social responsibility. You can engage in some of these extras, but they're really not extras, they're just tactics. But if you, I don't agree with this analysis, but the analysis is the market is a straitjacket, and it's because we have super capitalism today in contrast to a more paternalistic capitalism that existed in the 50s and 60s, more 50s, that companies really just don't have the luxury of doing these things. And if you're super smart and can earn that little extra for General Mills, by golly, the other food company down there is going to grab someone just as smart as you, and pretty soon it's a race to the bottom. I just flat out don't believe that the market is that overwhelming. I mean, it just doesn't make sense in terms of what people's practical experience has been. What I do think is that there are times when this model that I've put up here simply cannot be delivered on in its entirety. Mm-hmm. You're going to find situations where you cannot pay a reasonable risk-adjusted rate of return and a livable wage. And to me, that's a huge theological question that one needs to wrestle before God with, because I think you're called to do both. And if you can't, what does that mean? And how do you live into that, in a sense, shortcoming? And I'm not totally convinced of this, what I'm about to say, so hold it with a grain of salt. But it seems to me, because we live in a broken and fallen world, at times we have to choose between what are, in essence, the lesser of two evils. We may choose rightly. We may choose the best of the two choices or three or whatever choices that we have, but we still, in some deep way, are choosing evil. And we bear some ongoing responsibility for that, for which I think perhaps we are called to confession and being humble before our God and receiving the grace that He has. So the two dangers that I have run into around this is, on the one hand, because it's very hard to live in that tension, I feel called to do this, but I can't really deliver. And so one solution that some Christians, many Christians in business do, is just reduce what I'm called to down to, I'm just called to be nice. And I'm nice, so I'm okay. I mean, it is amazing. I will ask Christians in business, how often do you encounter a conflict between what you think God is calling you to and that which would be the most profitable choice? And the by far answer I get is never, which I find astonishing and probably not accurate. But there is a psychological factor, this sort of cognitive dissonance, that I'd rather just get out of this tension because it's too hard to live in it. But on the other hand, there are some who say, oh, you're right, it's just this horrible conflict. We'll never be able to do all of this stuff. I choose one. And I don't think as Christians we get that option either. We have to live in this tension for as long as we can, searching for that creative third way out, which so often shows up. It's one of the other reasons I think Christians are should be some of the most innovative people in business, because they don't have the luxury of saying, oh, I just won't pay that wage, or the market will let me get away with this. They say, no, I want to do what God wants me to do, and I don't really quite see how I can do that in the current market conditions I'm operating in, but I'm going to hang in there for as long as I can before I end up having to choose something that's less than all of what God wants for me. So, yeah.
We just have time for one more question.
My name's David. I'm a junior here at Carlson. My question is, how do we handle the stumbling block of focusing so much on our works as from the model that profit drives more jobs, more capabilities? How do we avoid having that feeling of like, oh, we have to do this, and that really kind of we forget God sometimes, or like Christ, or like what really drives us. So how do we handle that?
I don't know if I understood his question. I didn't fully get a clear view of your question. I'm sorry.
Okay. So one thing that I was wondering is that as we try to drive towards, as we handle decisions based upon profitability, I think that one of the issues is that, like, why are we doing that we do? Shoot. I'm trying to think how I can explain.
Let me take a crack at maybe, and tell me if I'm getting close to what you're saying. The need to balance all of these various competing, and the fact that there's no formula, and the fact that you need a reasonable risk-adjusted rate of return along with protecting the environment, and on, really becomes such a dominant piece that it is very easy to forget that we're here for the glory of God, or in my model, here for these higher purposes. Because in operations, you're spending so much time down in the nuts and bolts of this decision, that decision. Is that, am I getting it kind of what? Okay. So actually, Professor Naughton talks about this in one of his books. And he says, basically, you just have to build, I mean, at an organizational level, you have to build systems that when you are making decisions, force you back through your purpose, your mission. I was hearing a guy a couple weeks ago from Chick-fil-A, and he was saying that all companies have missions, but there are some companies that are on a mission. That's what you'd want, your company. If you've got a mission statement, you'd want it to be about that. And so you begin to bring that, organizationally, you bring that frame back into decisions as a sort of discipline. At the same way, I think you bring your own personal walk before God back as a discipline through kind of traditional spiritual disciplines, daily time alone with God in prayer, regular reading of God's Word. These sort of traditional spiritual disciplines are specifically designed to cultivate habits of the heart that will show up when you're under pressure and under scrutiny. And so both at an organizational level and at an individual level, you build them in structurally, I think.
I would just say that one of the challenges we all have to take on is to adhere to Paul's scripture, which says we have to renew our mind. Okay, and so, I think it personally is very dangerous, to go out and deal in the world that we're dealing in without taking time every day to say, hey, am I renewing my mind? Am I in fellowship and communion with God? Am I actually praying and seeking God's highest and best on a daily basis? And I think if you start without doing that during your day, the forces that we're in, the materialism that we're dealing with, the challenges, that we see in our society, they are speaking loudly all the time. And so you need to take time to allow God to speak loudly in your life. And if you don't take that time, you need to assume that the voices that you're hearing, which aren't necessarily drawing you to the light, will take over. Okay, they will take over. And so you have got to take that time, find it. Don't make an excuse. Don't be like everyone else saying, I don't have time to get up and spend time with God and be in His Word and be in communion and be in fellowship. Obviously you are, because you wouldn't be here. But you've got to be disciplined. I mean, it's a war out there, right? I mean, the Lord has said it's a war, right? There's a battle. you know, and he's going to redeem it. He's going to win. Okay, but we need to be in a position where our minds are also being tuned to the things of God, and so that we can walk this out with all of our fallenness. I mean, honestly, all of us.